In a moment of stillness, Winston wakes from a dream so vivid, it leaves tears on his face and a memory he long buried, his mother's final embrace. In that fragile gesture, made once by her and once by a stranger shielding a child, he glimpses what the party could never fully erase: the power of private love. This chapter traces his deepest memory in the quiet rediscovery of what it means to feel. Winston awoke with tears in his eyes, the lingering weight of a dream pressing heavily on his chest. Julia, half asleep beside him, murmured something indistinct, but Winston could barely respond. What he had just experienced was not easily put into words. It was more than a dream, more than a memory. It was a convergence of emotion, remembrance, and revelation. As he lay in the silent, dim room, the atmosphere of the dream continued to envelop him, not fading but becoming clearer, as though he were drifting deeper into it rather than emerging. In that dream, Winston found himself inside the glass paperweight he had once treasured, its transparent dome now a sky, its interior a peaceful world bathed in soft, endless light. Everything was visible, every distance traceable. And within this crystalline stillness lived two gestures, one from long ago, one from recent memory, that now revealed their twin significance. The first was the protective motion of his mother's arm, shielding a child not from danger, but from despair. The second, eerily similar, belonged to a Jewish woman in a propaganda film who had shielded her son from machine gun fire seconds before a helicopter obliterated them both. These gestures, fragile and futile, spoke to something indestructible within the human spirit. They did not change outcomes, did not avert suffering, but they gave meaning where meaning was thought to be lost. From that dream emerged a confession Winston had never dared articulate. Until this moment, I believed I had murdered my mother. It was not literal. He had not wielded a weapon, but in his boyhood selfishness, he had chosen himself, his hunger, over her love. And in that moment of clarity, the old hidden memory resurfaced with vivid detail. He remembered her as a woman who never complained, who remained dignified and still, carrying out her domestic tasks with quiet resolve. After his father disappeared, she seemed to grow dimmer each day, not with sorrow, but with an eerie anticipation of something she knew would come. She cared for his ailing baby sister without words, only with touch. Her stillness was not weakness, but a kind of surrender, dignified and deeply private. Winston's memories painted a grim portrait of his childhood, a time of rubble, war, and endless hunger. He had scoured the city for food, fighting over scraps with other boys. He recalled how his voice, beginning to crack with adolescence, would scream in anger or plead with pathetic desperation at each mealtime. Though his mother often gave him the largest portion, it was never enough. He stole from the shelf, grabbed from his sister's plate, and raged at the invisible forces that denied him fullness. Looking back, he saw his hunger not only as physical but as moral, a hunger that had overridden empathy and decency. The turning point in that memory, etched now into his conscience, was the chocolate incident. A small slab, a precious rarity in those bleak days, was to be split 3 ways. Instead, Winston demanded it all. His mother reluctantly gave him most of it, saving a small piece for his sister. The girl, too young to grasp what she held, merely stared. And then Winston, consumed by a selfish instinct he could not contain, snatched her portion and fled. His mother's voice followed him down the stairs, calling his name not with anger but with desperate love. It was the last time he saw her. When he returned, she and his sister were gone, vanished into the machinery of a collapsing society. Whether they died, were taken to a labor camp, or disappeared in some other nameless way, he never knew. And yet, what lingered wasn't just guilt. It was the memory of his mother's final gesture, drawing her arm around his sister, holding her close. That image, mirrored in the woman shielding her child from the helicopter, now became a symbol of love that defied futility. His mother had no food, no protection, no words. but she had love. And even in defeat, she gave what she had left. The party had taught that feelings were irrelevant, even dangerous, unless they served the cause. But here was proof otherwise. Love mattered, even when it did nothing, even when it came too late. Winston tried to share this insight with Julia, but she, drifting back into sleep, dismissed it lightly. "All children are swine," she mumbled. Her words didn't offend him. He understood that her resistance was different, instinctual, rebellious, but not introspective. She didn't think in symbols or in legacies, but Winston was changing. For him, the memory of his mother was more than guilt. It was a doorway to something the party could not touch, a set of values formed before ideology took hold. His mother had lived by private standards, loyal not to slogans, but to her child. She had not needed to justify love, nor defend it. She had simply loved. This realization led Winston to consider the proles, those vast, disregarded masses. He had once seen them as irrelevant, dull, even animalistic. Now he saw them as the last carriers of human feeling. They had not been hollowed out by ideology. They laughed, wept, protected, and lived by the rhythms of their bodies and hearts. They were not loyal to Big Brother, nor to any cause. They were loyal to each other. It was only now that Winston understood. The party's true crime was not merely controlling thoughts, but erasing emotions. And yet, within the proles, those feelings survived, messy, uncontrolled, but real. His thoughts drifted again to a scene not from memory, but from recent life. A severed hand on the pavement. He had kicked it aside without a thought. At the time, it had meant nothing, just another fragment in a broken world. But now the moment struck him as symbolic of how far he had drifted from feeling. The party had conditioned him to recoil from sentiment, to see compassion as weakness. Yet deep within him, as stirred by his dream, there remained something else, something tender, ancient, and stubbornly human. As Julia stirred awake, Winston voiced his revelation. "The proles are human, we are not." It was a verdict, not only on himself, but on the entire party system that had trained him to forget love. And with that realization came a dangerous clarity. "They can make you say anything," he later said to Julia, "but they can't make you believe it." The party could control his actions, his words, even his memories. But they could not conquer the feeling in his chest when he remembered his mother's arm around his dying sister. This was the seed of his resistance. Not rebellion through action, but rebellion through remembrance. Not revolution through violence, but revolution through love. His defiance would be to feel even when it was futile, to remember even when memories were forbidden, to love even when love was useless. In a world where nothing had meaning unless the party assigned it, Winston discovered something meaning could not be taken away from: human connection. This chapter, more than any before it, becomes Winston's emotional turning point. It strips away the political facade and reveals the deeper battle being fought, not for power but for the soul. And in that battle, Winston takes his first true stand. He does not shout, he does not act. He simply remembers, and in doing so, reclaims the right to feel. In the quiet darkness of his secret room, Winston awakens not with clarity, but with tears. The image that stirs his soul is not one of slogans or party commands. It is a dream, luminous and weighty, wrapped in memory. In this vision, his life unfurls beneath a soft glass dome, the sky itself pressed against the fragile curve of a paperweight. Within that clarity lies a gesture, a woman's arm wrapped protectively around a child. It is a gesture repeated across time, first by Winston's mother, and again, decades later, by a Jewish woman shielding her son from bullets in a film reel of war. This repetition carries a message beyond words. It is love, distilled into a moment of helpless defiance. When Winston whispers, "Until this moment, I believed I had murdered my mother," what he is truly confronting is not a crime, but a lifelong suppression of shame and unresolved grief. The memories rush back, the post-war scarcity, the broken silence of his family home, the constant hunger that sharpened both his needs and his selfishness. As a child, Winston had taken more than his share. In his desperation, he had stolen the last piece of chocolate from his dying sister. And yet, the memory that haunts him is not of the theft, but of his mother's silence, how she embraced the little girl, wordless, still, wrapped in a love that asked for nothing and expected nothing. Orwell does not present Winston's mother as heroic in the traditional sense. She is not intellectual nor politically rebellious. Yet she possesses a strength that transcends ideology. Her standards are her own, quiet, rooted, unwavering. In a society where actions are judged only by their utility to the party, she embodies the sacredness of the ineffectual. She gives love because she loves. She mourns because something has been lost. She protects because protection is what a mother does, even when there is no safety left to offer. This is the essence of the human that Orwell tries so tenderly to reclaim. The simple, unmeasured acts of affection and decency that once held a society together. In Winston's rediscovered memory lies a quiet rebellion. He realizes that meaning is not found in outcomes, but in intentions. His mother's final embrace did not save the child. The refugee woman's arm did not stop the bullets. But those gestures matter because they were human. They were free. In recognizing this, Winston begins to see the true depth of the party's cruelty. Its greatest crime is not just the control of truth, but the devaluation of love. It teaches people to discard instinct, to view personal feelings as disposable, as weaknesses. Under the party, nothing exists unless it can be counted, reported, or weaponized. But Winston sees that a touch, a glance, a remembered rhyme can hold more power than any speech. He begins to understand that history is not just written in ink and archives. It is held in memory, in love, in the spaces where human connection once lived. From here, he shifts his view of the proles. Once seen as passive and stupid, they now appear to him as the last keepers of the old truths. They cry, they sing, they marry for love, they weep for their dead, they hold hands. In the party's eyes, they are insignificant, but in Winston's awakening, they are sacred. The proles are human beings, he says. We are not. This statement is not an insult to himself, but a recognition of what has been stolen. Julia, half asleep, calls Winston a beastly little swine in his youth. It's a comment made with the carelessness of exhaustion, but it hints at something larger. Children, yes, are selfish, but what becomes of a society that never outgrows that? What happens when a state encourages permanent emotional adolescence, where love is suspect and compassion is weakness? Winston's mother and the prole women are reminders that growth, real moral growth, requires loss, pain, and the willingness to act for others without promise of reward. The real horror, Winston reflects, is not physical suffering. It is the idea that love can be made meaningless. If the party could change your inner world, if it could make you stop loving someone, that would be the ultimate betrayal. But here, Orwell offers hope. Julia says calmly, "They can't get inside you." It's a quiet line, almost tossed aside, yet it becomes a shield. The human heart, bruised and hidden, is still untouched. It can be denied, silenced, but not truly altered. Even as Winston contemplates the inevitability of being caught, of being tortured, of being made to confess, he holds on to one truth, that staying human is still worth it. Not because it will change the world, not because it will lead to revolution, but because it is the only real thing left. Love, pain, memory, these are what make a person a person. And if you can still feel them, still carry them, then you have not been defeated. Winston's journey in this chapter is not about action. It's about awakening. His rebellion begins not in public acts, but in personal recovery. He does not become a hero. He becomes a son again, He becomes a brother again. He becomes a human being again. And in Orwell's hands, that is the most radical act of all. In the quiet stillness of their secret hideout, Winston awoke with tears streaming down his face, shaken by a dream too intricate for words. The dream had not only summoned an image, but a forgotten truth, buried so deep in his memory that its return now felt like a personal upheaval. Within the dream, a radiant world unfolded inside the glass paperweight, a miniature universe illuminated by gentle light, vast and peaceful, yet haunted by a familiar gesture, an arm extended in protection. His mother had once made that gesture, and then years later, a nameless Jewish woman on a newsreel had repeated it, shielding her child from a hail of bullets just before a helicopter annihilated them both. These mirrored moments converged into a powerful emotional realization. He turned to Julia and said, "Until this moment, I believed I had murdered my mother." But he quickly clarified, "Not physically." What emerged next was not just a confession, but a revelation long repressed. He recalled the hunger, the neglect, the endless tension of their war-torn household, and the slow emotional disintegration of his mother after his father vanished. Through these memories, we see the cost of survival, the moral erosion that hunger and fear can bring. The most heartbreaking memory involved a small slab of chocolate unfairly snatched from his younger sister's hands, followed by his flight, and the realization that he would never see them again. The moment symbolizes a deeper truth, that even a child under sufficient deprivation can justify cruelty. Yet what lingers more than guilt is the memory of his mother's final act, a quiet embrace of his sister. It had no purpose, no outcome, no power to change their fate, and yet it was filled with meaning. It was love, unaltered by consequence. It was human. Winston's mother had followed a private moral code, one untouched by party doctrine or collective narratives. In this gesture, Orwell places the heart of the chapter. A love that, though powerless, retains its dignity because it is chosen. From here, Winston turns to the proles with new eyes. The proles are human beings, he says. Their lives, though crude and ungoverned by the party's ideology, still maintain a raw emotional honesty. The proles have not been stripped of their instincts for love, grief, and loyalty. They cry, they rage, they remember. In contrast, Winston sees himself and the outer party not as human, but as shells sculpted by fear and surveillance. Humanity, in Orwell's world, is not about intellect or strategy. It's about the ability to feel and act out of private, ungoverned love. Julia, still half asleep, mutters, "All children are swine," a cynical but revealing view. And yet Winston disagrees, not by words, but by reflection. He clings to the idea that even ineffectual acts of love can be sacred. To love someone, even when it leads to loss, is to reclaim part of one's soul. Orwell quietly introduces the theme that resistance begins not in slogans or marches, but in memory and compassion. The conversation shifts into the realm of fear and reality. Winston confesses his belief that their time is limited. Arrest is inevitable. Torture, separation, and death await them. Yet even in this fatalistic outlook, they cling to one another, not for survival, but for loyalty. Confession is not betrayal, Winston insists. Only feelings matter. This is one of Orwell's most poignant assertions. The state can break your body, but not your love, unless you give it up willingly. Julia responds with quiet strength. They can't get inside you. And in this shared belief that internal freedom still exists even in the heart of oppression, lies their final hope. Winston agrees, and in doing so, reclaims a sliver of humanity. The telescreen may record everything, but it cannot measure love. It cannot kill belief. Orwell's genius is in presenting this resistance not as a rallying cry, but as a whisper, a soft assertion of self that survives even when the world says you don't matter. The scene then shifts dramatically as Winston and Julia make their way into the luxurious inner sanctum of O'Brien's apartment. The richness and silence of the space, its thick carpets, its green-shaded lamps, its absence of grime, immediately disorient Winston. Here, even silence feels dangerous. O'Brien seems detached and unreadable. Yet with a flick of a switch, he does the unthinkable. He turns off the telescreen. In this single moment, Orwell creates a rare rupture in the totalitarian fabric. For the first time, a character with power offers a glimpse of real choice. Winston seizes the moment. He confesses his crimes, his doubts, and his desire to join the Brotherhood. Julia echoes his resolve. Their honesty is stark, raw, and painfully real. O'Brien listens calmly, then one by one he begins asking questions, chilling in their extremity. Would you commit murder? Throw acid in a child's face? Give up your identity forever? And finally, the hardest of all, would you separate from one another and never meet again? Julia immediately says no. Winston hesitates, caught between two words, yes and no, before whispering the same. In that hesitation, Orwell captures the moral complexity of rebellion. You may be willing to do anything for the cause, but you are not willing to erase the love that gives your life meaning. O'Brien accepts their answer without judgment and proceeds to explain the nature of the Brotherhood, a decentralized, untraceable network bound not by structure but by an idea. Nothing holds it together except an idea which is indestructible. This idea, Orwell suggests, is what totalitarian regimes fear most. Not armies or protests, but belief. An idea passed from person to person cannot be imprisoned. It cannot be tortured. It survives. But O'Brien is clear. Their work will bring no visible result. They will see no change. They will be arrested, tortured, and killed. The Brotherhood offers no rescue, no redemption. Only the slow, painful extension of truth into the future. We are the dead, O'Brien says. Their only hope lies in becoming dust, in planting seeds they will never see sprout. And yet Winston accepts this. He toasts to the past. In Orwell's world, memory itself is rebellion. To remember the old rhymes, to love without logic, to believe without proof, these are the acts that keep humanity alive in a world that would rather see it vanish. The chapter ends not in triumph but in solemn purpose. Winston leaves the meeting not empowered but resolved. His path is clear, even if it leads to destruction. The real victory, Orwell tells us, lies not in escaping the system, but in refusing to let it steal your soul. In the bleak universe of 1984, where steel walls enclose not only the body but the soul, the quiet dialogues between Winston and Julia shimmer with unexpected warmth. These are not grand speeches of revolution, but hushed confessions shared between lovers, aching for dignity in a world that has stripped them of meaning. And yet, within those murmured words lies a resistance more profound than any weapon could wield. When Winston murmurs aloud, "The proles are human beings. We are not human," his voice carries the weight of surrender. He does not claim superiority, instead he confesses loss. In the face of the party's relentless machinery, he no longer sees himself as whole. Julia, awakening beside him, asks simply, "Why not?" Her question isn't intellectual, it's instinctive, human. It gently challenges the fatalism in Winston's tone. That small exchange becomes a turning point. In it, Orwell captures a profound truth. The first act of reclaiming humanity often begins not with defiance, but with doubt. And in Julia's question lies the seed of that quiet rebellion. As Winston reflects on their impending doom, he voices a fear more intimate than death: betrayal. He imagines the moment when they are captured, tortured, broken, not in body, but in heart. "If I confess, they'll shoot you, and if I refuse to confess, they'll shoot you just the same," he says. There is nothing they can do to save each other, nothing that will make a difference. Julia listens, and when he defines betrayal not as confession, but as emotional surrender. She understands. If they could make me stop loving you, that would be the real betrayal. Her agreement is steady. They can't do that, she says. They can make you say anything, but they can't make you believe it. They can't get inside you. This belief that the inner world remains untouched is one of the most powerful ideas in Orwell's novel. Julia's conviction is quiet but unwavering. She doesn't need arguments. She simply knows. And Winston, drawn into her certainty, dares to believe it too. If you can feel that staying human is worthwhile, even when it can't have any result whatever, you've beaten them, he says. That single line becomes a lighthouse in Orwell's storm. It shifts the meaning of resistance from changing the system to protecting the soul. Even as the telescreen watches, even as the party tightens its grip, there remains a space, small and sacred, where love, memory, and belief reside. It is the space the party fears because it cannot see it. They had never mastered the secret of finding out what another human being was thinking, Winston muses. They can torture, they can extract facts, but the heart, the source of love and meaning, remains beyond their grasp. Even when truth is rewritten, even when the world is twisted into absurdity, the soul can hold on. The inner life, mysterious even to oneself, resists. What emerges from this chapter is not a tale of triumph, but a testimony to something deeper: the power of emotional truth. In a world where actions are monitored, language is corrupted, and loyalty is demanded, the refusal to let go of feeling becomes the final act of defiance. Winston and Julia, through their love, create a space the party cannot enter. Their shared tenderness, their fear, even their despair are human, and that alone is radical. The tragedy, however, is woven into this fragile hope. Both Winston and Julia sense that the end is inevitable. They will be caught, they will suffer, but they cling to one principle: that their love, as long as it remains untouched, will be their victory. This is not naivety, it is courage, the kind of courage that whispers rather than shouts. It is not about defeating the regime, it is about surviving it with one's inner truth intact. And this message, this quiet insistence that what we feel matters, is profoundly relevant today. In a world often flooded with noise, distraction, and manipulation, the passage reminds us that protecting our ability to love, to remember, and to care deeply is not weakness. It is strength. Julia's faith that the party cannot make her believe what she doesn't want to believe is more than optimism. It is spiritual resilience. Winston's hunger for meaning, even when meaning seems impossible, is a testament to the enduring cry of the human heart. These conversations speak across time. They ask us to look inward and ask ourselves, what do I believe? What do I feel that no power can take from me? What memories, what loyalties, what quiet truths do I guard not because they are useful, but because they are sacred? And in asking these questions, Orwell leaves us with lessons that extend far beyond his fictional world. That even in darkness, light exists. That even in silence, love speaks. That even in surrender, the refusal to forget what matters is, in itself, a kind of victory. Winston and Julia do not rise in arms. They do not lead revolutions. But in loving one another, imperfectly, fleetingly, desperately, they become more than victims. They become witnesses. And in bearing witness to one another's humanity, they shine a light on what the party fears most: a soul that remembers how to feel. Perhaps, Orwell seems to suggest, the true revolution begins not in the streets, but in the heart. And what does all of this mean for us, those not living under Big Brother's gaze, but navigating the noise, pressure, and distraction of the modern world? It means that 1984 is not merely a dark fantasy of a distant future. It is a reflection, sometimes a haunting one, of what happens when we lose touch with our emotional truths. Though our world today may not have telescreens in every room, we carry tiny ones in our hands. Though we are not silenced by force, we are often lulled into silence by fatigue, algorithms, or fear of not belonging. In such a world, the quiet resistance of Winston and Julia becomes not a relic, but a map, pointing us back to the fragile, powerful core of what it means to be human. Memory, for instance, is not just something we preserve in photo albums or cloud storage. It is resistance. In Orwell's world, to remember was to rebel. Today, in the age of endless scrolls and curated feeds, remembering what matters emotionally, morally, truthfully is a way of staying awake. It reminds us that we are not merely products of the moment, but carriers of stories, values, and loves that shape who we are. And love, real, messy, vulnerable love, is not weakness. In a culture that often prizes detachment and control, Winston and Julia remind us that love is the last stronghold of the soul. To love someone, even when it brings no reward and might lead to pain, is to claim a piece of inner freedom. Their love was not practical. It didn't save them, but it gave their resistance meaning. That lesson is timeless. In a world of shifting alliances and fading certainties, love, unearned, uncoerced, and fiercely personal, still matters. Their resistance wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it was barely spoken. But that's what makes it so real. We don't have to shout to be brave. We don't need to win arguments to be strong. Sometimes just holding on to what we believe, softly, faithfully, is enough. In an age of noise, truth whispered from the heart is a quiet revolution. And while the tools of control may look different now through targeted ads, data tracking, or subtle social coercion, the battle remains the same: to protect the sanctity of our inner life. The world can shape what we see, but only we can decide what we feel, what we remember, and what we choose to stand for in private. That's why Winston's decision to toast to the past is so powerful. It's not nostalgia, it's resistance. In remembering a world with mothers, lullabies, chocolate, and quiet love, he reconnects with something the party could never fully erase: dignity. And for us, the past can be a compass, not to live in, but to learn from. Every kind word, every cherished tradition, every forgotten song is a reminder that there is something deeper than trends and louder than propaganda: the human spirit. In the end, 1984 does not offer rescue. It does not promise redemption. But it does offer something harder and more real: the possibility that, even in darkness, we can choose to be fully alive. By remembering, by loving, by refusing to let the world tell us what to feel. So the lessons remain. Let us remember that memory is not just nostalgia, it's the soil of truth. Let us hold that love, freely given, is still the most sacred form of defiance. Let us honor quiet integrity, even when no one is watching. Let us resist not with banners, but with our tenderness. And let us never forget that even if the world says we do not matter, we still do, because we remember, because we love, and because we feel. Perhaps Orwell's most powerful message is this: the true revolution does not begin in the streets, it begins in the heart. In the shadowy sanctuary of O'Brien's apartment, a clandestine conversation unfolds, measured, precise, and quietly unnerving. O'Brien, calm and composed, outlines the reality of what Winston and Julia are about to join: a resistance movement without structure, visibility, or certainty. You will be fighting in the dark, he tells them, and the words linger in the air with quiet gravity. There will be no comradeship, no sense of unity, and no assurance that change will ever come. What they are asked to believe in is not a tangible revolution, but an idea, one so fragile and yet so enduring that it must pass from mind to mind, like a whisper that survives long after the body that spoke it is gone. O'Brien's tone, though never harsh, is laced with a strange irony. Even as he speaks of violence, betrayal, and death, There is an elegance in his movements and a sense of ease in his voice. He is not a fanatic, and perhaps that is what makes him more dangerous, or more trustworthy. Winston feels a wave of admiration, even reverence, for this man who appears to embody both power and intellect, cruelty and civilization. For a fleeting moment, Winston forgets the shadowy figure of Goldstein. In O'Brien, he sees the unshakable anchor of resistance. As O'Brien dismantles the myths surrounding the Brotherhood, he replaces them with a colder truth. There are no passwords, no secret meetings, no network to lean on. The Brotherhood is not an organization in the conventional sense. It is an idea, a current of thought that resists erasure. No member can name more than a few others, and even Goldstein himself could not betray a comprehensive list. There is no list. There is only belief. Those who join must accept isolation, despair, and invisibility. They will likely be caught. They will confess, and they will die. The Brotherhood offers no rescue, only the faint, unreachable promise of a distant future. We are the dead. Our only true life is in the future. This future, O'Brien admits, may not arrive for 1,000 years, but that changes nothing. The work must go on. It is the quiet spreading of sanity, person to person, generation to generation, that forms the essence of their struggle. Against the immense machinery of the thought police, direct action is futile. Only the endurance of an idea can survive. As the meeting draws to a close, O'Brien lifts his glass in a toast, offering choices laced with faint sarcasm. To the confusion of the thought police, to the death of Big Brother, to humanity, to the future. Winston chooses instead to toast the past, and O'Brien responds with solemn agreement. The past, after all, holds truth, the very thing the party seeks to erase. Before Julia departs, she is handed a white tablet to mask the scent of wine. Once the door closes behind her, O'Brien seems to forget her completely, as though she has already faded into the margins of operational necessity. He turns to practical matters, asking Winston about his hiding place. Winston describes the room above Mr. Charrington's shop, and O'Brien approves it, temporarily. More arrangements will follow, but first, he promises to send Winston a copy of the book, Goldstein's Manifesto. Even the way O'Brien pronounces the title gives it weight, as though it belongs in italics. There are only a few copies, and the thought police destroy them quickly. But the book, O'Brien says, is indestructible. If even the last physical copy were gone, it could be rewritten from memory. O'Brien then details the method by which Winston will receive the book. A misprinted word in his work assignments will prompt a request for a replacement. The next day, Winston will go to work without his briefcase. On the street, a stranger will tap his arm and hand him a new one, with the book inside. Winston must return it within 14 days. Before leaving, O'Brien asks if Winston has anything else to say, and rather than voicing defiance or making demands, Winston finds his mind drifting to fragments of memory. His mother, the paperweight, the room over the shop. He recalls an old nursery rhyme and asks if O'Brien knows it. With quiet dignity, O'Brien recites the lines. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's, a memory preserved despite everything. It is not just a rhyme, it is an echo of the past, a rhythm that still dares to exist beneath layers of enforced forgetting. As Winston prepares to go, O'Brien hands him a similar white tablet and shakes his hand with a crushing grip. At the door, Winston turns back one last time, but O'Brien, now poised to reactivate the telescreen, is already returning to his official duties. The moment, like so many in the novel, is fleeting, precious, and gone. In this quiet yet pivotal chapter, Orwell draws back the curtain on the romanticized notion of rebellion. There is no grand army, no secret society waiting in the wings. There is only the lonely path of belief. What Winston and Julia are offered is not power but truth, unsharpened, undramatic, and devoid of comfort. To join the Brotherhood is not to resist with might, but to choose suffering in order to preserve a fragile sliver of human dignity. Their journey will not end in freedom. But in accepting the terms, Winston acknowledges a deeper calling, not to win, but to witness, not to overthrow, but to remember. And that, in Orwell's world, is its own kind of rebellion. In the dim quiet of O'Brien's apartment, the architecture of rebellion is not built with raised voices or armed resistance, but with careful silences and confessions offered like folded paper, tender, cautious, and deliberate. This scene in 1984 reveals not the explosion of revolt, but the quiet construction of something deeper, an internal revolution that begins with belief and is sustained not by strategy, but by endurance. O'Brien begins with a truth as cold as it is clarifying. "You will be fighting in the dark," he says. "You will always be in the dark." With these words, he strips away any romantic illusions of rebellion. The Brotherhood, as he explains, is not a network of comrades, but a scattered constellation of individuals, each alone, each carrying only an idea. There is no list of members, no knowledge of numbers, no symbols, no safety. The rebellion they are joining offers no hope of survival, no support, and no end in sight. Yet it is precisely this structureless design that makes the Brotherhood indestructible. Nothing holds it together except an idea which is indestructible, O'Brien says. And in that, Orwell introduces one of his most enduring truths, that even when everything else is destroyed, an idea, if carried faithfully, can survive. Winston listens, not with fear, but with awe. There is something in O'Brien's poise, in the grace of his movements, in the weight of his words, that evokes reverence. A wave of admiration, almost of worship, flowed out from Winston towards O'Brien, Orwell writes. It is not merely the promise of rebellion that moves him, it is the manner in which it is delivered. O'Brien speaks of brutal tactics, suicide, mutilation, altered identities, with a softness that is almost ironic, as if reminding them that though horror is inevitable, it is not the end. This is what we have got to do unflinchingly, his voice seems to say, but this is not what we shall be doing when life is worth living again. Then quietly and without spectacle, O'Brien dismantles every fantasy Winston may have held about the Brotherhood. There are no underground hideouts, no passwords, no coded handshakes. There is only the idea. No comrade will help you when you are caught. We never help our members, he says. You will have to get used to living without results and without hope. The work, as he frames it, will not lead to revolution in their lifetime. It may not lead to anything they ever see. We are the dead, he says, and in that chilling phrase lies a strange kind of peace. There is no delusion, only acceptance. The true life, the true change, may come in 1,000 years. Until then, sanity must be passed from one mind to another, generation after generation. It is here that Orwell introduces one of the most beautiful contradictions of the novel, that hopelessness, when accepted consciously, becomes its own form of strength. When Winston and Julia raise their glasses, O'Brien offers a series of ironic toasts. To the confusion of the thought police, to the death of Big Brother, to humanity, to the future. But Winston chooses something unexpected. To the past, he says. And O'Brien agrees. The past is more important. In this small exchange lies a deep truth, that remembering, truly remembering, is an act of defiance. In a world where memory is erased and history rewritten, to remember honestly is to remain human. As the meeting nears its end, O'Brien turns to practical matters. He promises Winston a copy of the book, the legendary text by Goldstein, and outlines how it will be delivered. The process is so ordinary, an exchange briefcase in the street, yet it carries the weight of something sacred. Even the way O'Brien says "the book," with careful emphasis, signals reverence. Though the thought police destroy them faster than they can be printed, he assures Winston that it makes very little difference. The book is indestructible, because its words live not just on the page, but in the minds of those who believe. And then, just before they leave, O'Brien and Winston share a moment both eerie and tender. "We shall meet again, in the place where there is no darkness," Winston says. O'Brien replies without surprise, "In the place where there is no darkness." It is a phrase that has haunted Winston's dreams, a symbol of either salvation or doom. But for now, it binds them in a shared understanding. Perhaps it is not a literal place at all, but a state of mind, a corner of memory untouched by fear. Winston, overcome by the intimacy of the moment, asks almost without thinking, "Did you ever happen to hear an old rhyme that begins, 'Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's'?" To his surprise, O'Brien does not scoff. He completes the stanza gently, almost solemnly. In that fragment of verse, meaningless to the regime but rich with cultural memory, Winston sees something fragile and enduring, a world that once was. And O'Brien, for all his ruthlessness, chooses not to bury it but to speak it aloud. In that moment, they are not conspirators or rebels. They are simply two men remembering something beautiful in a world that has forgotten how. When Winston rises to leave, O'Brien gives him a small, white tablet to mask the smell of wine, one last, quiet precaution. Then he shakes Winston's hand firm and crushing. As the door closes behind him, O'Brien turns back to his desk, his work for the party resuming as if nothing had occurred. But something has. In that brief conversation, a bridge was built between past and future, between belief and resignation, between darkness and light. And what can we, living decades after Orwell wrote these words, draw from this haunting passage? We learn first that resistance is not always grand or visible. Often it is silent, often it is lonely, but it is no less powerful. To fight in the dark, as O'Brien says, is to commit without certainty, to carry truth even when no one sees and no one applauds. We learn that ideas passed from one person to another are stronger than regimes. No matter how many books are burned, if someone remembers the words, the idea lives on. In our own time, flooded with misinformation and distraction, this lesson is more important than ever. We learn that hope is not the promise of reward. Sometimes hope is the act of planting seeds we will never see grow. Sometimes it is living with purpose, even when the outcome is unseen or the path unknown. We learn that memory itself is a form of rebellion. In a world that wants us to forget, to scroll on, to move on, to numb ourselves, remembering becomes sacred. Remembering who we are, where we come from, and what we once valued keeps us grounded in truth. We learn that the human soul is sustained not by power, but by meaning. A rhyme, a book, a whispered phrase. These things hold more force than a fist. And finally, we learn that the revolution Orwell writes about does not begin in crowds or speeches. It begins in quiet rooms, in stubborn hearts, in the choice to remember, to love, to believe, even when the world says not to. Perhaps the most powerful message Orwell leaves us is this, that the soul, when faithful to its memory, becomes indestructible. And in that faithfulness, in that whisper of truth, we find the only light that no darkness can erase. Winston finally understands. Staying human is not about survival. It's about refusing to let go of love, even when love has no effect. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. In the next chapter, we enter O'Brien's private world, where loyalty is tested and illusion becomes weapon. Join us there and stay human.